Yes, I want to welcome everybody to this event, which serves a dual function, which is very exciting. For one thing, it is our March event of our Social Sciences Occasional Lectures. And for another, it is the first event of our Women's History Month celebration. So around campus you will see posters with our program for Women's History Month, and we're very proud to kick off the celebration here. So I'm very happy to introduce today's speaker, and this is Harriet Baber from University of San Diego, and she's a professor of philosophy with numerous journal articles in metaphysics behind her. She's an expert on logic in addition to that. And she has a book that came out in 2008, which has the title of the talk that we're going to hear about today, The Multicultural Mystique, the Liberal Case Against Diversity. And some people might think, well, that is an oxymoron. We will see how that works out. And then she has a book coming out about global ethics in 2012. So a prolific author and a local prolific philosophy professor. So Harriet Baber.
Thank you. Okay, so this is my book. They gave me a really good cover, and I'm really pleased to be here. One of my kids went here, and he liked it, and he's now graduating from UCSD. So we're really happy about Mesa College. And you're not going to like what I have to say, but I will entertain you, I promise. Okay? So, the multicultural mystique, the liberal case against diversity. First, let us ask, what is multiculturalism? What is it that I don't like? And I don't like multiculturalism. Well, the way I'm using the term, I do not mean multi-ethnicity. I'm not talking about a society where people look different, where their parents or grandparents or ancestors came from different places, and we all look different. And I think that's great. I'm not talking about multi-ethnicity or multiracialism when I talk about multiculturalism. No. I'm also not talking about cultural hybridity. And a lot of people, non-liberal people, don't like cultural hybridity. They think that our culture is in some way being watered down. So they interviewed some guy from somewhere in the rural South who didn't like the idea of hybridity and all these, Muslims coming in and such like. And he said, they're going to take the lasagna off my table and replace it with couscous or, tacos. Well, where did the lasagna come from? Come on, right? So I was in Italy in January, and what really surprised me about Italy was it had pizza. I just didn't realize it, So I'm not talking about cultural hybridity, the more the better, and we are culturally hybrid, right? Not just in the US, but in the Anglosphere generally, because think about our language, think about English. It's really made up of spare parts, right? And the fact that our language is so hybrid suggests that our culture is hybrid, because that's where all that stuff came from. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about what economist, Nobel Prize winning economist Amartya Sen calls plural monoculturalism. And this is the doctrine of the salad bowl. The idea that diverse groups maintaining their separate identities within a society, separate identities, interact peacefully without coalescing. The idea is that in this kind of society, people should maintain their ancestral cultures somehow. And the idea is that if you buy this kind of multiculturalism, plural or monoculturalism, individuals in the interest of authenticity ought to maintain, reestablish, or invent connections to their ancestral cultures, right? And I wonder why. I mean, what's the idea? You take one of these Q-tips, you scrape the inside of your cheek, you send it off to the genetic testing center, $100, you get back your genetic makeup, and that tells you what languages you should learn, what cultures you should identify with. Now you can get this for dogs, right? You scrape the inside of your dog's cheek, send it off, and if it's a mutt, you find out exactly what he is. And I don't buy this. So when we talk about multiculturalism, this is what I'm talking about, the salad bowl doctrine. So why don't I like plural monoculturalism? Well, I argue for the melting pot against the salad bowl, the good old American melting pot. And I also argue for proactive government policies to promote assimilation, including strict enforcement of anti-discrimination regulations and affirmative action policies. Why? Because discrimination is a reality. And in many cases, it's a result of implicit bias. And I have another PowerPoint here, if you want to get into this at some point, where I talk about implicit bias. There's an online test you can take to see if you have it. And the idea is that even people of goodwill harbor all sorts of prejudices and are biased in favor of dominant groups. So even if we want to do the right thing, we're not going to do the right thing because, not for any reason that we're at fault, because we're the way wired up. So we need these government policies to set things straight, including affirmative action. And I defend this, including affirmative action involving hard quotas. But that's another issue. So this is where I stand politically, right? And that's because I am a liberal. I am a progressive. And when I say liberal, I don't mean libertarian. I mean liberal. I mean left-wing, democratic, socialist. Okay? Keep the red flag flying. I am a socialist. I believe in big government, high taxes, social safety nets, social engineering, right, in the interest of creating greater options, a greater range of options for all of us, and dismantling the kinds of ethnic stereotypes and constraints that lock us in. Okay? Now, I'm not a social scientist. I know this is a social sciences series. I'm a philosopher, so I do a priori. I do stuff right out of my head. I'm not big on data, though I do have some data. But some people ask, and right now people are really worrying about whether we can afford philosophy, and I think this is outrageous. There has been an attempt to close down the philosophy department of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, which we're all objecting to. We can't afford this stuff. Well, you know, we can afford not to have this stuff, because philosophy, even if we don't have the answers, and even if we don't have the data, we talk about how to set questions, and that's really important. So I'll talk a little bit about how we frame the questions. This, of course, is our founder, Socrates, right? Okay, so let's frame the question about multiculturalism. The conventional way of doing this, right, the conventional framing of these disputes concerning multiculturalism is to ask the following kinds of questions. Do minorities have a duty to assimilate? Now, duty suggests something you don't want to do. Do I have a duty to grade papers? Well, it's not something I want to do. I hate it, right? But I have a duty. It's something I don't want to do. So the suggestion here is that minorities, the implication, the presupposition is that minorities don't want to assimilate. If you take philosophy courses, they call this a fallacy of many questions. You know, will you stop beating your wife? If you say yes, you've admitted to it. If you say no, you've not only admitted to it, but you said you're going to keep doing it. So this is the same kind of thing that's going on here. The idea that you have a duty to assimilate suggests you don't want to. Okay? Another question, if we frame the issue in this way, does multiculturalism put minorities at an unfair advantage? Right? And that suggests that multiculturalism is something that minorities should support, that it's good for minorities, may not be bad for the dominant culture, but good for minorities. Now, I question this, and I think maybe we should try framing the controversy in another way. Do current social arrangements thwart the desire of minorities to assimilate? Now, assimilation is a two-way street. There is acculturation and there is assimilation. Acculturation means we learn the language. We adopt the habits and preferences and behaviors of the dominant culture. But assimilation is something more than that. It means that the dominant culture accepts us. Okay? So it might be that in spite of efforts to belong, in spite of adopting the folk ways of the culture, assimilation just doesn't happen because we are not accepted. And the question is, do current social arrangements thwart the desire of minorities to assimilate? I'd say yes. Because white men speak with forked tongue. Typically you hear people saying, oh, well, you know, those minorities, whatever they are, they keep to themselves. They won't assimilate. But when you ask the minorities, they say, these guys won't let us in. Okay? Does multiculturalism add to the unfair disadvantages minorities face? And I think it does, because it makes ethnicity more salient, and it locks people into identities that they haven't chosen and that they might prefer to shed. Okay, so I'm suggesting we simply frame the question in a different way and see what happens. Okay, so what is the liberal case against diversity? Well, liberals hold that a good society maximizes effective freedom. Now, Isaiah Berlin, right, distinguished between two other concepts of freedom: negative freedom, which was just freedom from government regulation, right? This is the kind of freedom that libertarians, I am not a libertarian, this is what libertarians want, and positive freedom, which was a potentially oppressive arrangement where people were being pushed to behave in ways that somebody or other thought would be good for them, and he didn't like that. But I don't mean freedom in either of these senses, I mean capability. So to be free is to have lots and lots of options. Now, this is Women's History Month, so what this discussion comes out of is my reflection on my prospects as a woman, right? Now, when you look at jobs, how they're organized, and sex segregation among occupations, the occupations in which women figure are 1/7 of the occupations in which men figure. So the options for women are relatively restricted. If I were to go, I remember, let's see, I had my car towed. I'm a very bad driver. I won't get into that. So I go to the tow lot, right? It was a very unpleasant place. It was in a trailer. There was a line of people going all the way around, right? And the person behind the counter was behind bulletproof glass because by the time you get there, you want to kill somebody, right? And they had a sign up saying, tow truck drivers wanted, no experience necessary. Now, could I get that job? No. They don't hire women for jobs like that. And there are a lot of other jobs that I couldn't get because I'm a woman. Now, most of these are jobs that most people wouldn't want. But I would rather do jobs like that than do the kinds of jobs that women can get, Walmart, you know, that kind of thing. Among my other things, is I had to do community service, right, for a day. And this was really embarrassing because it wasn't for doing anything glamorous like speeding, which I usually get, but for littering, because I threw a cigarette out the window. So I was doing community service, right? And they take us to, you know, I have to go to this big parking lot in Chula Vista, and here are the other miscreants, right, waiting to get taken in one of those buses that has the windows blacked out, right, to the place where we're to do our work. So we get taken to a ravine somewhere in Mission Hills, right? And they said, I guess you guys think you're just going to be by the freeway picking up litter, but no. So we have to march a mile and a half into the ravine, and there are all these trees that have been cut down and trimmed, and we have to haul the branches out, right, to the road so that they can be picked up. So we spent the day hauling these really heavy branches and tree trunks out, and I thought this was just fine. I would rather do a job like this than the kind of jobs women have to do, but women can't get jobs like that. So on this account, right, what we want when we talk about freedom is what Sen describes as capability, having the widest possible range of options. Having the world organized in such a way that I, as a woman, can, if I had to, which would be disastrous, but if I had to, can get a job hauling tree trunks out of a ravine, or driving a tow truck, or being a dishwasher. I applied for a dishwasher job when I was in graduate school at the Blue Jays restaurant in Baltimore, and I got turned down because the guy said it was lifting heavy trays, so I took him to EEOC, the Equal Opportunity something or other, which you should think about, right? And I said I've been discriminating against, and I won a settlement, right? Because the idea is we want the widest possible range of options for everybody. We want freedom because we are liberals. We are interested in liberty. Okay. Now, the problem with multiculturalism is it locks individuals into unchosen identities, affiliations, and social arrangements. Things we did not choose and which maybe we don't want, and which in some cases are highly restrictive, okay, from which some people want out. Consider Keith Richburg. This guy is a journalist with the Washington Post, and he was sent to Nairobi to head the Africa Bureau in Nairobi, and he's a black guy, and he didn't like it one bit. Talk to me about Africa, he said in his book, and my black roots, and my kinship with my African brothers, I'll throw it back in your face. I hate this place. I hate it, hate it, hate it. And why should I feel anything more? Because my skin is black? I want no part of it. This isn't me. right? Why should it be him? As he puts it in another passage, you know, my ancestors were brought here in chains 400 years ago. They've been here longer than most white people have been here. What connects me to this place? Because you took a swab from out of my cheek and said, here's where I come from. So we ask, do people like their cultures and their communities? Okay, we can't assume that we do. And we have a narrative, right, that we've been locked into that says, oh, here are these poor minorities, and they just want to retain their ancestral cultures. But they have to make a Faustian bargain in order to mainstream economically, so they give up all this stuff that they want. But should we buy this? Should we assume that people like their cultures, especially when their means the cultures which are associated with their ancestors? Okay, we shouldn't assume that they do, and we shouldn't assume that they should. Why should you feel a connection to your ancestors, right? To people who just happen to be genetically related to you. Okay, and you know, I think we should reject essentialism, the idea that in virtue of blood and race, right, in virtue of genetics and biology, we are a certain way. But, you know, if you want to be a multiculturalist, if you want a salad bowl, let's switch gears for a minute. If you want the salad bowl, you should ask, what kind of salad bowl do you want? And there are a number of different options historically, which I talk about in my book, The Multicultural Mystique. Get it on Amazon. Okay, so here's one option. It's the Millet System. And this was devised by the Ottoman Turks. So the Ottoman Turks conquered the Byzantine Empire in 1543, right? Dark day, that. And they ended up with an empire full of non-Muslim minorities, because they were Muslims. These are the guys that ran Turkey for quite a long time, right? And they had to do something about it. So they established a system because they couldn't divide the empire up geographically. These non-Muslim minorities were all over the place. They were in Constantinople, they were in Thessalonica, and on and on. So they devised a sort of non-geographical, right, autonomous region, so to speak. Initially, they devised a millet, a community for Greek Orthodox, headed by the Greek Orthodox patriarch. But subsequently, because there were other minorities, they devised millets, or community systems, for other minorities, including Jews, Armenians, and a bunch of other minority religions. And these millets, these communities, were defined by religion. And each of these communities was autonomous to the extent that it collected its own taxes, it did its own legal system within limits. The Ottoman legal system, the Muslim legal system that dominated the entire empire, trumped, but you could take your own cases to family court within your system, and the patriarch or the religious leader who led your millet was effectively the boss. Okay, so these were semi-autonomous but non-geographical regions within the Ottoman Empire, and it worked pretty well. It started collapsing in the late 19th century, right, for a variety of reasons. Okay, but the kind of system that they operated, we also see, for example, when it comes within the U.S. to Amish communities and Indian reservations, which are effectively semi-autonomous. In the case of Amish communities, the Amish don't contribute to Social Security, and they don't get welfare. They are more or less independent. And the U.S. has decided to give them that autonomy because they didn't cause trouble. We'll talk a little bit about how that might not be a terribly good idea. Same thing with Indian reservations, right? Semi-autonomous, you can go there to gamble, which you can't do outside, but I wonder how autonomous they are. What if they decided they would sell recreational drugs? Do you think the U.S. government will let them do that? I don't know. But this is the same kind of system where you have a dominant system and then minority groups that are semi-autonomous. Now, maybe you don't like this because the minority groups, while semi-autonomous, are not equal. And another option is the option we see in the Netherlands, the Dutch pillar system, right? And the idea here is, in the Netherlands, they never really resolved the religious conflicts of the Reformation. So they have a Catholic population and they have a Reformed Protestant population. And in order to reconcile this, somewhere around the late 19th century, Abraham de Cooper, right, formalized this pillar system where there were two pillars of society, the Catholic pillar and the Protestant pillar. And subsequently, they also incorporated a secular pillar that included anybody and everybody else, including Jews, secularists, and anybody who didn't want to buy into these two other pillars. And the idea was if you belong to one of these communities, right, you can have TV stations and radio stations that were specifically devised to deal with your pillar. You worked in a company that was your pillar company. You went to a Catholic or a Protestant school and so on. Now, one problem with this is it started collapsing in the 1950s because once modernity sets in, you don't want to be restricted to a subculture. You want to be able to get a job wherever you go. You want to twiddle the dial and get whatever TV station you want to work. So while in this case, the different communities were equal, people didn't want to be locked into these communities. When immigration from Muslim nations became significant, right, in the 60s, 70s, and so on, there was some talk about establishing a Muslim pillar, but nobody wanted it because by then the pillar system was no longer viable. Then finally, and I mentioned this in my book, economic multiculturalism in Japan. So this is from a journalist, an Australian journalist who stays some time in Japan, and he's based there. That's where he's doing his reporting from. And they're all very pleasant to him and all this, but they make it clear that we don't expect you to stay. So he goes to a party, right? And they introduce him to somebody, a Japanese professor, whose specialty is Australian studies. And he describes what he calls, this professor describes what he calls economic multiculturalism. Now, Japan has a disastrous birth rate. What is it? Anybody know? It's something like 1. They're not reproducing themselves. It's an aging population. They need workers. So they import them from elsewhere. But they don't expect these workers ever to stay, nor do they expect their Japanese-born, Japanese-speaking children to stay. So he says, so we will promote multiculturalism among them so that they can retain their languages so that when they are sent back, it will be no problem. Okay, so they expect their guest workers to be guests, and you don't get to assimilate. You don't get to be Japanese, right? In spite of the fact that you are Japanese. Because you speak Japanese, you were born in Japan, you just are not racially correct. And I think all these systems are disastrous. The Ottoman system started collapsing in the late 19th century, and it wasn't good for the Ottoman Empire, known as the sick man of Europe, right? And these other communities just haven't been able to work. So what question that one wants to ask, right, especially considering the economic multicultural system in Japan, is, do you ever get to assimilate? How long does ethnicity remain? So here is, I got a lousy picture of him, Nadir Dudun, who is a journalist in France of Algerian ancestry, and he says, right, when, if ever, can people stop being ethnic? How am I supposed to feel French when people describe me as a Frenchman of Algerian origin? I was born here. I am French. How many generations does it take to stop mentioning my origin? And when I did the book, one thing that I noticed is what you get are not people saying, I want to retain my culture, but you get people saying, why can't I get in? Why can't I get in? How long does it take? Okay? But one asks, well, why would anyone want to stop being ethnic? Okay? I mean, what do you want? But let's ask what white privilege consists in. Well, whiteness is transparent. It's non-salient in most social contexts. It's nothing. It's not having an identity. And that's a good thing, right? It's transparent in the way that being male is transparent. If you're a guy, people don't attempt to explain your behavior, typically by reference to your sex. If you're a woman, and you cut up roughly, oh, it's PMS, or it's menopause, or it's something like that. But if you're a guy, they don't think being male means anything. It's transparent, right? And the privilege of not having an ethnic identity is a privilege of being an X. And I mention this because there was a pop sociology book that I read called Class. And it was a stupid book. And it divides Americans up into 9 classes, which is wrong, right? But it goes on, you know, class 3 has such and such characteristics, class 7 has such and such characteristics, and then it has an appendix. And it says, and then there are those people that really don't belong to any class at all. They are X's. they don't fit into any of those boxes. And as I say in the book, right, we'll soon see, right, I would bet that virtually everybody that read the book identified as an X. Okay? This is your out. This is what we all want to be. Okay? So we don't want these imposed identities. Okay? Consider Gary Kamiya, who's a journalist. I think he writes on, it's either The Slate or Salon. And he wrote a piece. This was with respect to Obama. Was he really black or not? Right? So he describes a situation where he got a job teaching part-time, I think at Berkeley, and he had to fill out a form that asked him to tick a box for race. And Kamiya, well, his mother is Scots-Irish and his father is Japanese, so what should he tick? He said, can I tick both white and Asian? No, you have to choose one. So he ticks white, and he says, why did I tick white? Well, because whiteness is a marker of racial invisibility. It means not having an identity, not having anything imposed on you, right? And the interesting thing is, when I wrote my book, Against Multiculturalism, I wanted people who agreed with me. So I looked around and I picked up a lot of sources for people who agreed with me, like Gary Kamiya, like Sen, like Keith Richburg, and a bunch of other people. And then when I looked back, I noticed something very interesting. All the people I picked up who agreed with me were people of color. So minority ethnic identities are not transparent, right? And that's what makes them undesirable from the point of view of many who are tagged with them. They're socially salient, and I'll talk about what each of these things mean presently. They are scripted, and this comes from Anthony Appiah in Color Conscious. Appiah is a philosopher, and he writes on such issues. And they also impose no exit rules. Okay, so social salience, what exactly does this mean? Well, a property is socially salient within a community to the extent that members of the community take it to predict or explain beliefs, character traits, tastes, or other socially significant psychological characteristics. For example, right, national identities, right? You know, we assume this is Nadir Dudun, right? And as a matter of fact, in the interview with him, they described him as having a pipe in one hand and a cigarette in the other, right? So we know what this identity is because in the Anglophone world, right, being French is socially salient. Okay, we have stereotypes. This is a snail who is terrified that he's going to get eaten because only the French eat snails. Right? They're quite good. I mean, I used to have snails by my house, right? And they were eating up my ivy, and every morning I would try to shoo them away and say, listen, you guys, you don't get out of here and your escargot. You know? And you know what? The California snail is the edible snail because they were imported because somebody thought they could have an escargot business, so they were edible. So you go get your snails and boil them. You know, lots of butter and garlic. They're great. Okay. Okay. Now, I didn't know how to put this in a better way, but the thing about social salience is if there are a bunch of different categories, national categories, job categories, or whatever, the fact that one category is salient doesn't necessarily mean that other categories in the same layer are salient. So here's an example. Like this guy obviously is a used car salesman. So being a used car salesman is socially salient. We make predictions about them. I mean, this is a vulgar guy, right? But being a non-used car salesman, being a doctor, a teacher, a customer sales representative, is not salient. Being female is salient. Being male is not salient, right? Being a person of color, being brown or black or whatever, is salient. Being white is transparent. It's not salient. And socially salient identities are unchosen. When a property is non-salient, individuals can choose the extent to which it figures as part of their social identity. But where it's salient, individuals do not have that choice. Take, for example, left-handedness. Okay? It's non-salient. Some people make a real big deal about it. I think at Seaport Village, there's a left-hand store. We can get all kinds of left-handed stuff, mugs with handles on the wrong side and all this. And I'm right-handed, so I don't get their stuff. But a lot of left-handed people are into this, but they don't have to be, right? Sex, on the other hand, is salient. You can't choose not to be viewed as male or female. Okay? Now, salient properties are social sorting rules. Okay? Consider this. When I teach logic, I keep my grades in alphabetical order on my spreadsheet. but I sort them in various ways where different properties are salient, where they're important. So for example, when I post grades, I sort them according to student ID, because that's what matters to me in that context, because I'm going to post them. And I think that's illegal, but don't tell anybody. When I am interested in sorting people by grades, so that I can decide who gets a job at the Logic Center for tutoring, then I sort them according to another rule. I sort them by grades. Now, salient identities, ethnic identities, gender identities impose social sorting rules. So, for example, on Thanksgiving, this picture is not coming up very well, okay? So there's a picture of women in the kitchen on Thanksgiving, right, cleaning up and messing around, right? On Thanksgiving dinner, I go into the kitchen with the women folk while the men watch TV in the living room, because at Thanksgiving, gender is salient. But this sorting rule, men sorted in one place, women sorted in another place, doesn't reflect the rule that accommodates my own interests, because my occupation and interests are more important to me than my gender. So these characteristics sort us out in such ways that ride roughshod over our own interests. Okay? These socially salient identities, so that's social salience. Then there's scripting. Also impose scripts on people, expectations of how we're expected to behave in virtue of ethnicity and gender. So for example, as a woman, I'm not only expected to go and do the washing up, I'm supposed to take an interest in children and make aren't they cute noises about them, like gaga goo goo. What a cute baby. Okay? I'm supposed to do that, or else people think I'm rude, weird, or just not a nice person. And I don't want to do that, because I don't like babies. Okay? And moreover, minority identities, like gender identities, are scripted. They impose these obligations. And when people fail to follow these obligations, they are reprimanded for it. So, for example, and this is Richard Thompson Ford, a legal scholar who I've also used in my book, who wrote Racial Culture, very good guy. I think he's at Berkeley now in the law school. I forget if he went to Berkeley and is at Stanford or vice versa, but he's a smart guy, he's a black guy, so he writes, right? Every racial group, with a telling exception of whites, has a derogatory term for persons who fail to exhibit their assigned racial culture. In other words, people who refuse to act their script. African American Oreos, Latin coconuts, brown outside, white inside, Asian American bananas, and Native American, you guessed it, apples. Okay, so there are all these terms, right? I mean, what's white on the outside and white on the inside? I don't know. Okay, and what's more, these minority identities impose no exit rules. Okay. A feature of cultural privilege is permission to be critical of your native culture and reject it temporarily or permanently. Appiah is congratulated for staying with Silas Marner. Who's ever read Silas Marner? I haven't. Oh, you have? Good. Okay, you have.
I have the comic book.
You had the comic book. Okay. I never even read the comic book, but my mother used to tell me the story, right? And it goes like this. Silas Marner is a weaver somewhere in rural England. You know, he has a cottage industry. My own ancestors did this kind of thing. I remember my mother describing one guy who had a loom. And, you know, I don't know, Lancashire, I know it's some crappy place in the UK, right? And it was a loom where he lay on the floor and he wove. And occasionally he wanted to come out for a breath, and he had this terrible wife who would grab him by the ankles and pull him back under and say, keep weaving, keep weaving. So Silas Marner had this kind of cottage industry, and then this little toddler comes wandering, right, and he picks her up, right, and he adopts her because they don't know where she comes from, and he names her Hepzibah or Epi. Well, it turns out that Epi is the daughter of the local magnate, the local aristocrat, and he discovers when she is about 18 or so that she's his daughter and he wants to take her back. So Epi says, no, thank you. Oh, I want Wise to be a lady, right? I'll stay with my old dad, okay? So she stays. She's traded down, right? And she's congratulated, right, for staying with a less privileged father, right? On the other hand, there's another piece of culture. There was a movie about Pinky, right? Anybody seen that movie, Pinky? Classic, okay? Okay, so Pinky is from the South, and she is black, but she doesn't look black. So she is passing, and she goes to a nursing school in the north to get her nursing degree, and while she's there, she becomes engaged to a white doctor, and she comes back south to say goodbye to her mother, to say, I'm going to go north, I'm going to marry this doctor, and I'm going to have a good life. Well, this is bad, right? This is bad. She's punished for this. And eventually, after the story goes through, she decides that she wasn't going to do this. She was going to go back home to help her people. Right, so this is Pinky. Now, when I first saw this movie when I was a little kid, I thought, this is terrible. Why does she have this obligation imposed on her just because she's black? That she has to be this terribly good person and give up a career in nursing and a good marriage to a doctor, when Donna Reed gets to marry a doctor and have a good suburban life? Why is this burden imposed on her? Well, the idea here is that going native is okay. If you're Lawrence in Arabia, trading down, becoming involved in a less privileged culture is something you congratulate people for. Good old Lawrence of Arabia, good old Appiah. But if you want to trade up, right, you got trashed for it. Okay? So there are no exit rules for disadvantaged cultures. Okay? Now, as far as cultures go, there is a conflict of interest between cultural preservationists, who are stakeholders in the culture, who have an interest in preserving that culture, and assimilationists who want to get out. And one of the things I've written in my book about are the Amish, right? And the Amish, well, this is back east, and I come from back east, right? And what Indian tribes are to the west, the Amish are to the east. They're a tourist attraction, right? And they operate primarily in eastern Pennsylvania, but in a lot of other places as well, right? And the interesting thing about these communities, and we're all very romantic about them, right, is that they contain quite a number of people, assimilationists, who just want to get out. And there are statistics about these communities. And in some communities, there is an attrition rate of as high as 37%. And the attrition rate depends on how close these communities are to non-Amish communities. So what this means is, if you're living in a community and you can see what the other guys live like, and if it's feasible to get out, you will get out, because it's lousy. Why is it lousy? Because they live the way people lived in 17th century northern Germany, on farms. And that is lousy. The work is hard, the work is boring. And it's also patriarchal and hierarchical. And the paterfamilias beat the crap out of his wife and kids. It's a lousy life, so people want to get out. But it's very difficult to get out, because in 1978, I believe, there was a law passed by the Supreme Court, well, not passed, but the Yoder decision in the Supreme Court gave the Amish the privilege to pull their kids out of school after 8th grade. So if you're Amish, you have an 8th grade education, and what are you going to do in the big wide world outside? Moreover, you have a very small window of opportunity when it comes to getting out, right? Between the time that you graduate from elementary school at 14 and the time you're baptized somewhere in late adolescence, 16, 17, okay? If you want to get out, you have to make the decision within those 2 or 3 years. Because if you leave later on, your family will never speak to you again. You will never see your family again. You will never have any contact whatsoever with the people you grew up with. Now, that's very difficult, right? You have to get out when you're like 14 or 15 years old with an 8th grade education and leave. And yet, in some communities, the attrition rate is as high as 37%, because living in an Amish community is absolutely ghastly. It's miserable. But if you have bought into that community, if you didn't get out, you're really stuck. You have no social security, right? Because you have opted out of it. No social safety nets, no education, right? Suppose you want to get out. You're like 50, 40, whatever. No experience, no job skills, no social security, no education. So if you are a member of that community and you're in that situation, you better preserve that culture, because you're a stakeholder, and if that community collapses, you're going to be sleeping under a bridge, right? So when it comes to ethnic communities, there's a conflict of interest between assimilationists who want to get out and cultural preservationists who are stakeholders and have an interest in preserving that community and preventing people from getting out. So if you're a member of this Amish community, you want to see to it that those kids don't get anything beyond an 8th grade education. and you want to move your community far away so these people can't get out, so that community will be preserved, right? So there's a conflict of interest there. Now, why do people choose to do ethnic? Well, as I suggested, there are stakeholders. They've got to preserve that community or else they have no place to go. And here are some other reasons. Some people just have a taste for ethnicity. They like it. It's cool. Who knows? Okay? Some people eat off of the multiculturalism industry. So there are lots of grants available for doing ethnic stuff. One of the things I mentioned in my book is when my kids were little, we would go down to Balboa Park and we saw Centro Cultural de la Raza. And they do all this ethnic stuff. And we see where the funding is coming from. And it's coming from about 9 different local and county and state government agencies, and it's coming from Bank of America and any number of different firms. So if you want to do ethnic, you can get grants and all this kind of funding to do this ethnic stuff. It's a business. But mainly, the problem is that most people have no viable alternative. You cannot get out. You're stuck. Okay? Because discrimination and exclusion persist. And the interesting thing is, I was reading something, I think it was about Sweden, but this could go for a lot of different places. People, particularly in Europe right now, where the right wing is in the ascendancy, are saying, well, you know, these immigrants, they keep to themselves. If they only joined us and became Swedish or became French or whatever, they would be okay. But as it turns out, when you ask the immigrants, they say, but we can't get in. They won't treat us, right, like Swedes or Frenchmen or whatever. So basically, and this, I could talk about a piece by Akerlof, an economist, right, on economics and identity, okay? So this is the standard kind of view. You have people who say, since we can't join you, we will beat you. We would rather join you, but you're not letting us join you, so we're going to beat you, okay? Because discrimination and exclusion persist. Okay, so, and moreover, the alternative for many people, the alternative to doing ethnic is downward assimilation to a rainbow underclass. And this comes from a very interesting book by Alejandro Portes, who is a sociologist. And the book is called Legacies. And it's about second-generation immigrants. And he has a big data set study among people, I think, in South Florida and also in San Diego. So it's very interesting. And he notes that what's the alternative to doing ethnic? Well, the alternative is to becoming sort of general all-purpose lower class and living in this very chaotic, right, criminal underculture. So, I mean, that's another reason why. And then, of course, there are some people that are doing it for fun. They're making oppositional identity statements, for example, notoriously. I wish this light were on a little bit better. Okay, these are, this is Lila and Alma Levy, the French Headscarf girls. And back in 2005, 2006, when the French government passed a law forbidding women to wear headscarves in lycée, in public high schools, okay, they challenged the rule. They challenged that. And here's their father, and I do wish the light was a little bit better because he is distinctly blonde, right? And you wonder, who is this guy? Well, okay. These girls are the children of a Jewish secular lawyer and a non-practicing Muslim mother who decided it would be cool to do ethnic, right? So they were the test case for this, and in a great many cases, one suspects that, you know, ethnicity is an oppositional identity statement. It's cool, okay? Now, the question becomes, how serious are they about doing ethnic? Do they want to get beaten up, right? Do they want to get stoned if they sleep around? Do they want all this stuff? And the answer is no, because typically when people favor multiculturalism, they have what Stanley Fish calls boutique multiculturalism in mind. They want the stuff that's interesting, they want the cuisine, they want the ethnic dances, they want the costume, but they don't want the intolerant behaviors or all the other bad stuff. If they are strong multiculturalists, Stanley Fish says, if they really want to buy the whole culture, then they get into something of a bind. Because as liberals, they may want to affirm this culture, but this culture is a non-liberal culture that's contrary to the values that they as liberals affirm. Okay? Now, what's real multiculturalism like? Well, in really multicultural societies, exit is not feasible for most ethnics. It's not something you choose. You're stuck. And as I say, if you hold that preference satisfaction, as I do, is the greatest and only intrinsic value, then this means you're not going to get what you want. You're stuck. Okay, real multiculturalism restricts individual choice, what you get to do, how you are viewed, the script that you are obliged to perform depends on factors you didn't control, race, blood, ancestry. Okay? And moreover, this kind of multiculturalism undermines social cohesion. Okay? So the problem is that ethnic affiliation is ascribed and immutable. And what you end up with in a real multicultural society is a tribal Tony Soprano code. You can only trust blood. I have to say, I come from northern New Jersey, and when I watch The Sopranos, I always look to see if I can identify scenes, and sometimes I can. Remember the one scene where they are at this great big waterfall with a bridge going over it, and Tony and some other guy toss people over? You know what that is? That's the Passaic Falls. That's the Great Falls of the Passaic River. I lived right near there. Been there often. Never got tossed over yet. Okay, but that's what it's like. It's lousy. And what happens in a situation like this is you get self-perpetuating tribalism. We take care of our own, so our own will take care of us. Taking care of strangers signals dropping out. So neither your own nor strangers will trust you. It's, as I say, my experience growing up in northern New Jersey has completely turned me off of multiculturalism because I've seen it. Okay? So what multiculturalism seems to me to be inimical to the good life. And this raises, and how we return to the beginning, the philosophical question. Because as I say, I'm not a social scientist, I'm a philosopher. And as a philosopher, I ask, what is well-being? What is the good life? Okay, on the account I suggest, the only thing that's of intrinsic value is effective freedom. Preference satisfaction, getting what we want, whatever it is what makes our lives go well. Okay, whatever we want to be, getting that. Getting the things we want, whatever they are, doing what we want to do, whatever it is, and being viewed by people in the way we want to be viewed. And if you buy into that view of the good life, right, the idea that the more options we have to get what we want, the better off we are, then you will be skeptical about the value of multiculturalism. Okay? Thank you. Perfect timing. Let's have some questions.
Questions?
Yes.
I wonder if you tuned into the recent hearings about Peter King from New York has held hearings.
I haven't tuned into the hearings. I've just heard about it. It's disgraceful.
What's going on and how,
It's disgraceful.
if you listen to the people participating, the senators and the government people, they're saying things that seem to be very in tune with what you're describing as multiculturalism. They're saying, we know we're not against Islam. We think Islam is perfectly respectable religion and it's all good, but we have to be careful of this radicalization of Islam. And it seems to me that there's a big divide and a big misunderstanding that, well, I guess I'm not really focusing on a question, but I'll just focus on one point. It seems to me that when people say, well, if it's a religion, it's okay. Whatever they say, we have to be tolerant of this ethnicity or of this group or of this community because it's a religion. And they have the right to do, so it's a kind of maybe pseudo-liberalism or a kind of tolerance saying, we respect your right to do whatever you want as a religion. Yet if we look inside the religion, as you were mentioning a moment ago, about certain, like the Amish, if the religion says women aren't worth as much as men, or women need to be oppressed, or take away rights of some of the people, it seems like, well, maybe we shouldn't be tolerant of that group, even though it is a religion. So it seems to me that Americans have this problem with letting anything go under the name of tolerance because they don't want to seem racist or, you know,
Yeah.
anti-multiculturalism.
Okay, first of all, I think there's an empirical question. Do Muslims, in fact, promote these values that are contrary to liberalism? And I've been to Turkey twice, and I've also been kind of involved in the Gulen movement, which is very neat. And Turkey is a modern democracy that has equal rights for women. Women are doing very well there. So I don't really think this is embodied in Islam as it's practiced. Of course, it's on the books, but it's on the books in Christianity and Judaism and everything else. But Christians and Jews, as we know, ignore it. And so do Muslims, who are contemporary people living in democratic societies. So it's empirically false that Muslims in the U.S. are promoting these, as far as I know, are promoting these policies that we as egalitarians should not countenance. Now, if they were, like the Amish, now the Amish are the problem. The Muslims are fine. It's the Amish that are the problem. Right? If they were promoting this, we should tolerate it. But they're not promoting this. So the Amish get a free pass because they're, you know, they're white, really white, right? Muslims don't get a free pass because they're, you know, kind of brown. Okay, so that's what I object to. But I'm not for giving people a free pass. I'm being very clear. I'm for being very clear about who's causing the problems and who isn't. And the Muslims are fine. The Amish are the problem. Okay?
Toggle back and forth between culture and ethnicity
Yeah.
or ethnics.
Yeah.
Are they interchangeable? Or?
Okay, I don't know what I suppose ethnic means ancestry. Okay? And culture means how you behave, your language, your values, and so on. And those are two entirely separate things. Okay, and it's, to my mind, I mean, what I'm arguing is that hooking up ethnicity and culture is what we want to avoid, because then that locks people into identities that they don't feel a part of, that aren't really who they are. So that's what I'm claiming.
But people often don't make a choice about their culture. I mean, depending on how close you are. I mean, there's some people that are 10th generation Dutch. I mean, there are people that are first generation Chinese and so on. So it's not always a matter of choice, right? I mean, you don't choose your culture.
Cortes, in that book by Cortes, right, he does a study in San Diego, and the second generation of Mexicans, right, these are the kids of immigrants. By the time they're 18, only 1/3 of them are fluent in Spanish, right? So they're going to high school figuring out how to conjugate those verbs, like 3 different conjugations, A-R, E-R, ya, 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 right? They're doing as badly as everybody else. So the culture, right, changes very, very fast. And I don't know anybody who's 10th generation Dutch who is ethnic, right? And I come from northern New Jersey, so that's one of the options, right? Everybody where I come from is either, let's see, Catholic, Jewish, Lutheran, Dutch Reform, right? But I don't see that ethnicity persisting, and ethnicity dies out pretty quick, and the culture dies out pretty quickly. So trying to lock people into that culture saying, this is what you are, is denying what people really are.
No, I'm saying, but that argument falls away when, if you come with cultural software, right? If I come from Beijing when I'm 3 years old to San Francisco, and I have Chinese rituals, I speak Cantonese or Mandarin, I eat Chinese food, there's no choice there about being locked in or not, in the sense you're using. I mean, I don't know if I would use the word ethnicity, but I come with that cultural software.
You come with that cultural software, but I'm suggesting that it degrades gracefully within a few years. And to impose that on people, to say, oh, you're supposed to be Chinese, or do you know how to say hello, meow, right? That is harming people because it's imposing it from outside.
Depends on the age too, right? There's a lot of contextual factors, right?
Okay, it's an empirical question, and I told you, like, by the age of 18, the second generation of Mexican immigrants can't speak Spanish, right? Assimilation happens. And when you, from the outside, say, it shouldn't happen, you should affirm your culture, right, because that's your ethnicity, you're imposing something on people that they don't want. The standard view is, but of course, people want it, they want to keep their cultures. But I'm suggesting, maybe some do, but lots don't, because it's not who they are.
Some do, because
Some do.
some
Some don't.
transition and come back and forth.
Some do, some don't.
If
and
you
that's all I'm
go
saying.
back and forth from Israel
Yeah.
and back to here,
Yeah.
you keep some of that, you know, and they pound it into you a little bit in Israel, and then you come here.
Some do, some don't. Are you from Israel?
Yes.
You sound like an English speaker to me.
I
Is that
am.
your main language?
I speak Hebrew and
What's easier for you?
easier, you know what, when I'm free at the house, it's Hebrew. Here, it's English.
So there's, I mean, there are differences. People pass back and forth. But what I'm suggesting is that we have this dominant narrative, right? And the narrative is, but of course, the real culture is your ancestral culture, right? And of course, assimilation will press you into being something you're not. Well, yes and no. I'm just suggesting we open up the narrative and recognize that different people have different preferences.
And for in my case, I think I'm not, you know, I'm making my Israeli tradition, but I'm taking it and I moved here and I accepted that and I'm making it my own American Israeli person that I am, you know.
So that's fine. I mean,
And I don't know what everyone else views me as, but I know what I see myself and what I'm doing.
I'm just suggesting let many flowers bloom and don't impose this ethnic obligation on people. That's all I'm suggesting.
Right. So it sounds like the example is acceptance within a country, so acceptance of other cultures,
No,
or
it's acceptance of other people and the recognition that they are involved into their cultures.
is there like an example country or place that you've been to? Gives me
Well, there's America. That's a place I've been to. And when you consider there was mass immigration, America is relatively good at dealing with immigrants because we're used to it. Right? So there were masses of immigrants in the 19th century, Irish and German. Then around the turn of the century, over 100 years ago, there were people from Southern and Eastern Europe and so on. And all these people were assimilated. Maybe not immediately, but they were assimilated. The melting pot works. And the interesting thing is, there's an article in the Prospect, British journal by David Goodhart, called Too Diverse. And what he says is, well, immigration, if it's too extensive, might be a problem. Because look, the U.S. is having a problem. There are 30% of the population that are immigrants, that are particularly Hispanic immigrants, and then there's the 70% of the regular population. Well, the 70% of that regular population are the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, largely, of immigrants who came around 1900. So assimilation happens, and I'm just saying, let it happen. Let people be who they are. Yeah.
Well, I guess my question is, well, what about that? What if that assimilation is imposed on them by the dominant group,
Right.
and that's where the
Okay, I mean,
issue.
that's the standard view, but I mean, it's an empirical question. Is it imposed on them? And as far as I can tell, not.
Well,
Yeah,
well, the history of America says that it is.
tell me facts. I mean, what happened is when people
Well-
came to the country around from Ellis Island, the beginning of the century, there was this interest in Americanization. But the
So
immigrants themselves wanted it.
Black people didn't necessarily come here by choice.
Exactly.
So it might be a little
Exactly
different than the
so.
Italians.
Exactly
and the-
so, but on the other hand, they weren't told, come on in, assimilate, come to our schools, join our churches. They were told, no, you can't
You
assimilate.
can't.
That was the problem. Keep out, right? So that's why Keith Richburg says, I mean, I don't belong to Africa. I'm just a regular American guy.
Well, that's where the idea of white privilege and white supremacy becomes the model for which Black people and other minority groups espouse to
Well,
and
the
look up
idea,
to.
okay, but the idea, as I said, what white privilege is transparency. It's not having an identity. It's being, quote unquote, just regular. And the thing that induced me to write this book, my hobby is, one of my hobbies. I've got lots of hobbies, right? Like, one of my hobbies is studying history. Another one of my hobbies is reading about linguistics. So I was reading a book about linguistic change and the way languages are adopted in some places and moved to other places and so on. So there was a true story about a little kid in France, and he's a child of immigrants from, Sahara, the Middle East, Africa, this kind of place, right, Algeria, I think. And he's being interviewed by the guy who's doing this linguistic study, and the kid claims he doesn't understand Arabic. He says, no, it's much too hard. And then he brags that he does all the shopping for his mother. So the interviewer says, and how does she communicate with you? Does she write down a list? So he catches out the kid, and the kid actually could understand Arabic, but he didn't want to admit it. And I thought, what's that kid thinking? And he's thinking what lots of other little kids are thinking. I just want to be regular. I don't want to be some Arab kid. I'm just a regular little French kid. And I think that desire should be honored.
it seems to me though that you're presupposing that racism doesn't exist.
No, I'm not. I think it does exist. I think
Well,
we need to
look,
fix
one of
it.
the strategies for dealing with racism
Mhm.
would be to say, look, if you're not going to permit me to become part of the dominant culture, I'm going to embrace my own
Yeah, yeah.
racial heritage
Okay.
because I need an identity of some sort, and if I can't acquire the identity of the dominant group, then I'm going to embrace this identity of the minority group.
Well, that's exactly what I said is happening. We can't join you, so we'll beat you. And what I argue is that through government intervention, through equal opportunity and strong affirmative action, we make sure that people can get in and don't have to end up embracing.
And
the
so
other
minorities are
position.
supposed to wait around for that to happen?
We're supposed to have a revolution to make it happen,
Okay.
right? Just like in Wisconsin, you know, get out and see it in the streets.
Just
We're
like the
supposed to
argument
make
that
it
this
happen.
strategy is somehow wrong.
It's
And
empirical.
under
facts.
ideal
We're
circumstances,
not-
maybe it would be wrong, but it seems to me under current circumstances.
And you also said it's
maybe
how we're
an
wired.
alternative.
You also said it's how we're wired, so how do we have a revolution against our?
We can, okay,
So
we can
that's it.
respond to it. Okay, so I have a discussion of implicit bias, right? And this is absolutely robust data, right? That people have these biases. But if you do things like, for example, they've done tests where they have a black guy telling these people what to do on the test, or they have a woman telling people what to do on a math test and so on, then the bias shrinks. So there are various ways, and there's no magic bullet, but there are various ways you can fix it. But the question then becomes, what, things are bad now, what should we be trying to do? Should we be trying to get people to feel pride in their ethnic identities? Should we be trying to do that? Or should we be trying as damn hard as we can to promote assimilation? And I think, you know, we can't do both, right? Because they tend to cut against one another. I'm just arguing that we should be trying as damn hard as we can to promote a colorblind, gender-blind society. But the only way we can do that is through color consciousness and gender consciousness, recognizing it, but denial won't make it go away, right? So we need color conscious, gender conscious laws, affirmative action policies strictly enforced in order to try to dismantle, right, the multicultural society. Yeah.
I just think, like, I don't know, this is just my interpretation. It's like the argument is, it's almost demonizing the minority groups for trying to find their way into society, as opposed to addressing the larger problem, which is white supremacy and what that represents.
I'm not demonizing them. I think for the most part, from what I've read, most members of minority groups would prefer to get in, want to assimilate. They're just being blocked. So I'm demonizing the majority group that says, oh, if only you would join us, we would be okay with you, but we're not going to let you. Okay?
Which is the
I'm
right issue.
demonizing the segregationists on the outside that lock people into ethnic affiliations that they may want to shed. You know, assimilation gets a bad name because it was used not to describe genuine assimilation, but subordination. And the term assimilation was used to describe a policy in Australia, white Australia, where they got the Aborigines, right? They got them, moved them into boarding schools in order to train the guys to be farmhands and the women to be domestic servants. So they didn't really mean assimilation. They didn't mean you become one of us, you marry us, you become middle-class Australians. They meant you become a colonized subordinate group. But that's not the kind of assimilation I mean. I mean it melting pot really melts. Okay, I mean that we obliterate ethnicity for real. Yeah.
When I have this discussion with my 21-year-old who's a senior at UCSD, his claim is that invisibility and saliency is changing. He says where he is anyway, he says nobody pays any attention in his generation to ethnicity. Nobody pays any attention to the color of your skin. Everybody just, you know, as a student, everybody gets along, you know, and nobody pays any attention to this.
Maybe.
And I don't know, again,
Maybe. It's changing, but
it's
slowly.
empirical, but,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know, I think, is he right? Is that really changing
I think it's-
without all the revolution?
Well, there's been something of a revolution already, and there's been a real attempt to change that. And in California, it's different. I come from back east, and when my kids have come back east, they were just absolutely appalled at the whole black-white segregation. You know, I come from Baltimore, right? I come from Hopkins, and they go back there, and they're just appalled. Everybody at the faculty club, all the people who are serving are black. It's just, and they're just amazed by it. So it depends on where you are and when you are, but I do hope things are getting better, and I think they are getting better, particularly since there's so much intermarriage, and nobody knows what anybody is, and we're all golden people. And I hope.
Oh, you can just ask your son how many black people does he see on campus there at UCSD every day. And that'll let you know where because racism is just a byproduct of economics and classism. So until we could be all anti-racist, but that doesn't mean anything if we don't have any economic equality or opportunities or access. If we don't have the same access or opportunities, or then
That's why I say it's a political
doesn't
issue.
matter.
You have to have those policies to undermine ongoing discrimination. And these policies are not in order to compensate people for past injustices. The injustices are now, and the idea is to try to minimize them because they're going on.
I remember this interview with the gentleman from Pseudo and Assimilate. I don't remember his name though, but she just wanted to know what he meant by white culture. And so I was wondering, is America in this sort of being considered white like a bad thing, like white culture is a bad thing, so to where
I don't know what white culture is. There is Western culture. There is what we are. Because we live here, and we're English-speaking people, and there's nothing that carries culture better than a language. So our culture, yours, mine, blah, 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 right, goes back to Europe, it goes back to England, it's part of the Anglophone culture. It goes back to Rome, it goes back to Greece, that's where we were born 2,500 years ago, and it belongs to all of us. So this isn't your culture because your ancestors came from Korea. Or this isn't your culture because 300 years ago your culture, your people were in Africa, is wrong. Right? Because we don't know anything about that stuff. I mean, if you just think of the culture history, you think about Rome and Greece and whatnot, well, what were the people on the British Isles doing then? No idea. They don't belong to us. Even if we were descended from them, they aren't our people. Right? Our culture history, our culture tree is not a culture tree that it's not a race and blood culture tree. It's not a white culture tree. It's ours, it's all of ours because of who we are as Americans, as English speakers.
lots of white people that I speak to and non-white people that I speak to, lots of the whites say, oh man, I feel kind of trapped that
Whoa,
being
woozy.
white
I
is-
mean, they're bullshitters. You know, it's like, oh, somebody's going to take the lasagna off my table and make me eat tacos.
Going to
Yeah.
college
You know
and
what they're doing.
minorities having advantage of voting, blah, blah, blah.
You know what we say in terms of, okay, I'm not, obviously, I'm not a minority racially, but, you know, I'm a woman, right? And I hear all this stuff, women are getting all the advantages, a white guy doesn't have a chance, and there's now a scholarship, a $500 scholarship for poor white men, right? $500, that's like your books for one semester, your food alone, right? So I said, okay, so you think women are having all the advantages? Would you trade places? You want a sex change operation? Would you trade places with me? And they wouldn't. I mean, privilege is privilege. Look at wage gaps. Look at all this stuff. Look at ongoing discrimination. There's data. So tell them that. Okay? There's class-based affirmative action in the Raleigh schools, right, where they busted kids who were poor. And the effect of it, right, is that most of these kids are black, and it's a good job. They've done really well on that. It's boosted scores. But, okay, that's fine, but, I mean, there's no question that it's not just class, it's race that exacerbates it, right? So I don't think you can get away with it. And all this stuff, how some people will say, well, people don't think I've got my job on merit, yada, yada, yada. Well, I'd rather have a good job without merit, right? I don't care.
Yeah, I mean,
You
if you
know,
look at.
I am an affirmative action hire, and I get the highest merit ratings every year in my department, and I publish stuff like crazy. This enabled me to get my foot in the door. I'm the first woman to get tenure in my department, and I had a hell of a hard time doing it. And I'm not ashamed of it, right? Because affirmative action, they always reverse discrimination. I mean, would you want a brain surgeon that was hired on affirmative action? Well, considering that things are unfair, would you want a brain surgeon that was hired because he was a guy? Right? My mother-in-law, who's 96 years old, right? She says she would rather have women doctors because she knows that they've got to have been better to get there. Okay? So I'm all for affirmative action.
If we look at just America in a historical context relative to where, I guess, what shaped America, then doesn't that kind of reinforce like the idea of white supremacy of all of our scholars and our great people and, you know, historically are white and we're not, we're excluding like, the African influence or the Asian influence. And
Well, we gotta fix it. We gotta fix it. And I'm not, if I were smarter, I would know how to do it, but I'm not smarter, but I suggest, as I say, affirmative action and equal opportunity enforcement of these policies and the various policies that universities can do to make sure that they have a diverse student body and a diverse faculty. It's just not easy, but there are a lot of things that we can do once we know that it's real, and we have to admit that it's real and not go into denial. One of my friends who's from back east came to Southern California, and we went to Indian bingo, where, we went to one of these gambling places, whatever, and she wanted to see real Indians, right? So she looked around and she said, these people aren't Indians, they're Hispanic. I said, duh, okay? So these classifications, and the naive have strange ways of understanding these classifications that are very fluid.
My mother's family's from Sicily,
Yeah.
so she would use the term so-and-so's Wasti. Right? But then there's a little bit of an irony to that, historically, right? Because Sicilians are Lebanese, Greek, Roman, Albanian, and North African. So it's just funny that people that use identity to kind of distinguish themselves, right? I mean, for good reasons and bad reasons, but also don't recognize the sort of comical absurdity of, or the lack of stability of that term. What is a Sicilian?
Yeah. Well, it's all absolutely absurd. I mean, when I was growing up, in order to get a job as a pipe fitter in construction, you not only had to have your parents or so come from Italy, but they had to be from the right part of Italy, right? And it was the southern part, right? Like this Yolanda, her parents came from Genoa. Nope. Okay, so the way people cut this thing up is bizarre, and it's more bizarre.
There are Germans in northern Italy. I mean, they're Italians, but they speak German. They grow up speaking German.
Yeah, you have it in Trieste. Yeah, I've just been there. Yeah.
So it'd be kind of like, it'd be nice if, on like, as far as like documentations, it'd be nice how they wouldn't constantly ask, what nationality, what's your ethnicity, what your background, when you fill out all your documentations for school or for anything, you always have to fill out what you are. If you're white, you're black, it would kind of be nice if society wasn't based on having to put down what you are.
Okay, well, first of all, there's a good pragmatic reason why we want those check boxes. Because if the census checks off X number of people in such and such a place belong to such and such an ethnic group, this is a reality on the ground, and it helps them understand how to deliver social services and what sorts of policies are necessary.
Or maybe word them differently or something like that. It just seems they're so blunt.
Yeah, well, maybe, but that's a question, that's a pragmatic question in terms of what kind of information do you need for various kinds of policies. But as far as identifying oneself, I mean, one would hope that ultimately these barriers come down and we no longer identify ourselves these ways. When I was in Italy, somebody asked me, well, everybody in America says they're like something else. Like, what ethnicity are you guys? Just American. Everybody says this, that, or the other thing, right? So I think, my view, I'm American, that's it. Yeah.
I was going to say, it seemed the ideal obviously would be to sort of eliminate the saliency.
Yeah.
But having these checkboxes, doesn't that tend to reinforce it?
Okay, that's what some people argue, or they'll argue that affirmative action reinforces it. But what I'm arguing is that you need color-conscious policies in order to bring about the ultimate goal of color blindness. Denial doesn't make something go away.
Because I'm also from back east, actually, Prince George's County around Washington, D.C.
Sure.
So, oh yeah, you're familiar.
You betcha.
I'm actually a product of forced busing, where I experienced both, benefit and but for instance, when I was in 7th and 8th grade, I was able to go to a magnet school, which is how they phrase the forced busing, for arts and humanities.
Yeah. I don't like the idea of forced busing. If your parents chose to send you to a magnet school, that's not forced.
Well,
of course, you were forced to do stuff because kids are always forced to do
actually, I chose this.
I mean, you were forced to eat your broccoli.
But that school existed was a byproduct of the forced busing.
Good.
The downside of that was that I also had 2 African American friends who weren't able to go to that school. They lived 4 doors down from me, and they weren't able to go to that school because that school was in a black area.
Yeah, I understand this, and there are all sorts of ways that things need to be fiddled. So two of my kids went to Knox Elementary School in Southeast San Diego when it was a French immersion magnet, and they were the only two white kids in the school. And almost, I think 85% of the student body were on welfare, and they were the only kids that had to pay for lunch. So I had to go and I had to make special arrangements to pay for lunch. So it's a French immersion magnet. So now they're fluent in French, and one of them has got his first job as a mathematician with a PhD at the University of Connecticut, and the other one, as I said, is graduating from UCSD, and they both speak French. And I can't understand them.
You're just like,
Right?
whatever.
So this is great. So I think this is a good idea, the magnet program. But I'm not arguing for any particular policy, this, that, or the other thing. This is one policy, but busing definitely helps.
Yeah, I've seen that it has helped in the past, but by the time it had come around to me, I saw it becoming more of a hindrance because, like I said, there were people that weren't allowed to go to the
Maybe,
school.
okay, I mean, you
that
can't,
lost that
you can't do
benefit.
things perfectly. We want to fix things up in a variety of ways, and no problems with the busing program as I participated in it, but we're just talking about principles, not how you implement it. And, you know, anything that will promote integration, and busing is one of those things, is probably going to be desirable.
Right, that's what I was saying with the check boxes. If they hadn't had those check boxes on, you know, on their application form to go to the school, they also would have been able to go, but the demographics wouldn't have been affected the way that they were by me going.
Okay, I know what you're saying. I know, but what I'm saying is that in terms of identifying people racially on the census, that's desirable because you need as much information. If you're going to engage in social engineering, which you are, I think you should, then you need to know what you're dealing with. That's all. What really always disturbed me was in other countries, some other countries, where they tag your passport by your ethnicity or your religion or whatever. And in Rwanda, they used to do that when you were Hutu or Tutsi. And then after the genocide, they decided this wasn't a very good idea. And I wondered what ever got into people's heads to have the idea that you should put down on the passport whether you're a Hutu or a Tutsi, whether you're this, that, or the other thing. That's what's objectionable. Collecting information, if you're going to use it for good purposes, is not objectionable.
So would your position on affirmative action be then that we need affirmative action until we have a colorblind society?
Yeah, but the question is, when do we have a colorblind society? If you look at the stuff on implicit bias, you think we're colorblind. There's a test online, Google it, IAT. Just do IAT, right? And they, how many have tried it? Anybody? Okay, well you can find it. It's, I think at MIT that they're doing this. And they give you a test. I won't even describe how it works, right? To see if you harbor unconscious prejudices in various ways. And when I took the test, there were two versions. One was the black-white version, and the other one was, do you think that science is male or not, right? So with the black-white version, I passed with flying colors, and I'm never going to take it again because I don't want to risk it. But with the women and science, okay, the result I got was that I identify science very strongly with males, okay? So we harbor all these prejudices in our heads, right? And colorblind society, when's it going to happen? So we've got to keep doing it.
Well, I mean, really, that's my question. Can you foresee a point in time, 10, 20, 30, 50 years out?
Oh, I'd say about
when
300
we have a
years.
society
Two, 300 years. I'd say 300 years.
against the,
I'd say we might be colorblind in 200 or 300 years, but I don't know. But it's not going to be 25 years.
so
because I think
another century at least of.
Sandra Day O'Connor said, well, in 25 years everything will be fixed. But I think 25 years is very optimistic. So you just got to keep giving people the IAT test, right? And when it comes out clear, right, that would be a good idea, right? When it comes out clear, and it's not just this gimmicky test, but they've done sting operations, and they've done it in the U.S., they've done it in France, where they send resumes. In the U.S., they sent 4 resumes. 2 matched mediocre resumes, and 2 matched superior resumes, right, with what were perceived as white and black names. It was Greg and Tyrone, okay?
Really?
Yes, really. So Greg got twice as many callbacks as Tyrone, right? And even the mediocre resumes that were white, Greg's mediocre resume pulled more callbacks than Tyrone's superior resume. So this is absolutely shocking. I've got the stuff I could.
It's not shocking.
Yeah, okay. I've got.
It's the reality.
It's depressing. It's not surprising, is what you're saying. So this is the way it works in France. And this is why I started writing my book, because I was interested in the riots that they were having in the banlieue, in the immigrant suburbs. They did the same stinger. They did the same kind of sting operation where they sent resumes from Pierre and Mohammed, right? And Pierre got 30% callback and Mohammed got 5%. So these are huge results. It's not subtle. So it's not just this gimmicky IAT test pulls funny results. When they do stuff like this, the data is absolutely robust. Now there are ways of testing that I've described. So let's keep testing people, and then maybe in 25 years, if everything came out clear, I'd say fine, no more affirmative action needed, but I don't think it's going to happen. So keep testing, maybe in 100, 200, 300 years, they'll come
I
out.
mean, I'm not surprised about France. I would be a little more surprised. Again.
You want to see the data? I'll put it right up for you.
Well, I'll give you a little personal note. My mom, who is white, left us, me, my brother and sister, when we were kids. We were like 3 or 4 years old. When years later, when I was able to meet her, she said the reason why she left was because she didn't know how to raise black kids. So we're talking about motherly instincts compared to, you know, relative to just somebody's name. You know, that tells you how deep it is in our society.
Yeah. And so it's likely to last for a while, but we just keep checking. And as I say, there are objective measures, and I described some of them.
I'm just wondering why you think that, given that it seems that your goals and what you're saying would be mostly agreed to by Americans on all sides of the political spectrum, at
Really?
least in
The goals maybe, but not the means.
the goals, but
Yeah.
not the means.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, why does socialism and communism and raising the red flag seem so horrific? You know, why do they see that as such a dangerous way of
I don't know.
that goal? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, okay, look,
Why do we, you know, why is calling someone a socialist?
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know, like
because
calling them a
we went through 40 years of the Cold War, and we were all propagandized, and you know, the stuff that I got as a child was Russia was this great big concentration camp, and everybody would be marching in lockstep, wearing identical gray uniforms to identical gray factories, and they would be working 16 hours a day, shoveling coal into furnaces. This is the kind of propaganda we got, and this is what people think. They think that socialism, which they identify as communism, they don't make any fine distinctions. They think that this is regiments, people, they think it's like North Korea, they think they won't have any freedom, any leisure, anything. But they're wrong, right? Because socialism, Denmark,
Well, old tradition of social democratic, but not socialism as such.
well, it depends on what you call it. I mean, if you mean by socialism, state ownership of all means of production, I don't mean that. I mean,
Yeah.
what I mean is a social democratic welfare state that you see primarily like in Scandinavia, also in places like France, Germany, who are doing fine. And a lot of my students, you know, they haven't been anywhere. The only place they've been is Mexico. So when they think of places other than the U.S., they really think of the third world, right? And they think that Europe is poor. Let me give you an anecdote, right? I was teaching a course on poverty and distributive justice around the world, and this was during the collapse of the big Japanese recession, I think in the 1990s. So one of my students said, yeah, she heard about that, and she and some of her friends had got together and thought about sending old clothes and food aid to Japan, right? And you know, my husband's British, and I go back there all the time, and they're doing a lot better than we are, but a lot of people don't know. Only, 17% of Americans have passports. They've never seen anything else. They really just think that everybody else is poor and miserable.
When you were talking about Pinky and
Yeah.
See the Smarter,
Sorry,
and
Smarter.
how Pinky can't go up,
Yeah.
and See this can't go down, I feel like that in my own family. I guess when I went back to Cambodia for a visit, it felt like that for me as an outsider looking into the Cambodian culture.
Yeah.
I identify myself as an American, and when I went over there, they looked at me like I don't want to be part of them because I speak differently and my idea is different.
Yeah.
So they use a lot of cuss words and they walk a certain way and talk a certain way, and it seems like they want to pull me down with them or something, and if I'm not going down with them, then I'm not with them.
There's a very interesting article by this guy, Appiah, that I talked about. He has a model, and he asks members of disadvantaged groups behave in ways that seem counterproductive. And one of the reasons is because their peers put a lot of pressure on them. Because he models identity in the following way. He says there's a certain there's a certain amount of utility that attaches to belonging to a group and also to having your group robust. So when people leave your group, think of the Amish, right? If people bail out, then the group is going to collapse, right? So people don't want their peers leaving. They put pressure on people, and that's what you're getting. And at the same time, majority groups, Appiah says, prevent people from getting in. So one reason why people find that they are locked into groups and behaving in ways that are disadvantageous, which keep them locked into those groups, is on the one hand, their peers trying to keep them in. How dare you be? Who do you think you are? You're being up there. Who do you think you are? Right? And at the same time, people from the majority group aren't exactly welcoming. So what Appiah says, and he talks about different sorts of programs that work, is that you really have to break that. So he just talks about 2 jobs programs for, ghetto youth, right, job programs. And in one program, they're taken away to camp somewhere, and they're trained for various jobs, and it's very successful. So they decided they wanted a cheaper version that would have them live at home and just come to the training program. And it didn't work at all, because the pressure that they got from their peers, who do you think you are, right, was enough to undermine the whole thing. So what you're talking about is standard stuff.
Well, in a way, we can go all the way back to Nietzsche and talk about his critique of the resentment of the resenters. Nietzsche criticizes Europe at the time, meaning late 19th century, for being massively against anybody trying to break out of the group and not embrace the identity of the group. It's very much a European 19th century going into the 20th century phenomenon.
Right, and also he points out that when the feminine mystique came out way back in 1963, the people who were up in arms against feminism were the housewives, right? Because they bought into this, and again, it's the same kind of case. Similarly with the Amish, they're stakeholders, right? If they have somebody saying that housewifing isn't a good thing to do, then it attacks them because they have an investment in it and they can't really get out at this point.
Like, how are our values and things like that determined? Like, where are they determined by law? Like, we're going to be imposed by now?
I have a prejudice about this. I think that what you do is you take philosophy courses and you figure it out for yourself. Okay? That's why we need philosophy, right? And everybody's always saying, oh, we can't afford all these luxuries. And as I said, they're trying to abolish the philosophy department at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. We can't afford this. Well, I mean, the Greeks could afford it. We're the richest society on the face of the earth anytime in history. We're saying we can't afford the examined life, which only is worth living. No, I mean, we need philosophy. It would be a better world if we had more of it. Oh, this is really, I really appreciate getting to do this. I've had
Thank you so much.
very, very good time here. So invite me back sometime and I'll do it for free.